I should have known something was wrong when I pulled into the school parking lot. The decorations from prom night were still scattered everywhere. Deflated balloons, torn streamers, and abandoned corsages dotting the asphalt like colorful corpses. But that wasn't what made my skin crawl. It was the single red balloon, perfectly inflated, floating motionless in the still night air. My prom dress still hung in the window, a crimson reminder of what should have been the perfect night. Mom had helped me pick it out. Vintage, she called it. Said it reminded her of her own prom night back in '95. Now the moonlight filtered through the delicate fabric, casting blood-red shadows across my bedroom floor. I hadn't touched it since that night 2 weeks ago. Couldn't bring myself to. The memories came flooding back as I sat in my darkened room. It had started raining that night. Not the romantic drizzle you see in movies, but a heavy downpour that made the streets gleam like polished obsidian. James had picked me up in his dad's restored '67 Camaro, and everything felt perfect. Too perfect. The gymnasium had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Twinkling lights, gossamer fabric draped from the ceiling, and an arch of silver balloons framing the entrance. My heels clicked against the polished floor as we walked in, the sound somehow cutting through the bass-heavy music. I remember thinking how strange it was that the emergency exit sign seemed so much brighter than usual, its red glow bleeding into the carefully crafted atmosphere. The punch bowl was the first sign that something was seriously wrong. I'd watched the student council fill it with the typical raspberry lemonade mixture, but now it had a darker tint, almost burgundy. The smell was different too, metallic, sharp. When Sarah Martinez took a sip and immediately started coughing, I thought she was just being dramatic. We all did, until she collapsed. The chaos erupted slowly like a wave building far out at sea. First Sarah, then Jason, then half the football team. I ran into the hallway, my heels splashing through puddles from the rain that had somehow seeped in. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, creating a strobe effect that made everything seem like a nightmare in slow motion. I found myself in the chemistry lab, though I can't remember consciously deciding to go there. The emergency shower was dripping steadily, creating ripples in a puddle of what I hoped was water. Broken glass crunched under my feet as I moved through the room. The air smelled wrong, like cleaning supplies and something else, something that made my throat burn. The bathroom was worse. I pushed open the door to find the mirrors cracked, dark water overflowing from the sinks. There was blood, not much, but enough to make my heart stop. A single red heel lay abandoned by the last stall. I recognized it as Katie's. She'd shown it off earlier, bragging about how they were Christian Louboutins from her stepmom. The footprints led to the stairwell. Not just Katie's, but others, dozens of them, all heading up. The emergency lights had kicked in, bathing everything in a hellish red glow. Torn streamers and fallen decorations created grotesque shadows on the walls. The music from the gym was still playing, but it sounded wrong now, distorted, like it was being played underwater. The roof access door was open, rain hammering the concrete in sheets. The city lights stretched out before me, blurred and refracted through the downpour. The chain-link fence that enclosed the roof had been bent outward, like something had burst through it. A corsage lay nearby, its white roses now stained pink with what I prayed was just rain and food coloring. They never did tell us exactly what happened that night. The official story was carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heating system, combined with contaminated punch that had been spiked with something from the chemistry lab. But that doesn't explain everything I saw. It doesn't explain the bent fence, or why they brought in people wearing hazmat suits, or why the CDC quarantined the entire school for a month. I've spent the last 2 weeks collecting newspaper articles, police reports, anything I can find about that night. 23 students were hospitalized. 5 never came back to school. Katie's body was never found, though they claimed to have DNA evidence of what happened to her. The chemistry teacher resigned the next day and moved out of state. The principal took early retirement. But here's what keeps me up at night. That red balloon in the parking lot. The one that was floating there when I arrived tonight, perfectly still despite the wind. Because I swear it's the same one I saw the night of prom, just before everything went wrong. And as I sit here writing this, I can see it outside my window, floating in the darkness, waiting. Always waiting. They say prom night is supposed to be perfect. They say it's a night you'll remember for the rest of your life. They were right about one thing. I'll never forget it. But not because it was perfect. I'll never forget it because I'm the only one who knows what really happened. And sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that distorted music playing, still smell that metallic tang in the air, still see that red balloon floating in the darkness. Perfect? No. But unforgettable? Absolutely. The Waldorf Grand Hotel wasn't supposed to be our prom venue. But when a pipe burst at school 2 days before the event, the parent committee scrambled and somehow managed to book this impossibly luxurious space. Standing at the base of the marble staircase, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and gilded mirrors, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were trespassing in someone else's world. The rain started just as the first limo arrived. Not the gentle spring shower the forecast had promised, but an angry downpour that hammered against the towering windows. The city lights beyond became nothing more than smeared watercolors, and our reflections in the glass looked like ghosts trapped between two worlds. I first noticed something was off when Madison insisted on taking the service elevator to the powder room. "The regular ones are too crowded," she'd said, pulling me along. The brass detailed doors looked like something from the 1920s, complete with a manual gate that squealed when you pulled it shut. I should have said no. Should have taken the stairs. Should have done anything but step into that metal coffin. The elevator deposited us on the wrong floor, the 13th, though I could have sworn the button Madison pressed was for 2. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions, its once elegant wallpaper now peeling in places. A room service cart lay overturned, dark red wine spreading across the carpet like a crime scene. The air felt thick, almost humid, despite the building's supposedly state-of-the-art climate control. We found the bathroom, but it wasn't the modern marble oasis from the ballroom level. This one was all vintage tile and ancient plumbing. Someone had written something in lipstick on the mirror, but condensation had made it illegible. The sink was running, water spilling over the edges. Madison's reflection looked wrong somehow, distorted, though I told myself it was just the old mirror playing tricks. When Madison didn't return from the stall, I went looking for help. Somehow I ended up in the hotel's industrial kitchen. It should have been bustling with staff preparing for tomorrow's events, but it was deserted. A pot boiled over on the stove, angry hisses of steam rising into the air. The knife block on the counter was empty, all its slots gaping like hungry mouths. The laundry room door was propped open with a shoe, another stiletto, though not Madison's. The industrial machines were all silent except for one dryer, tumbling something deep red and sequined. Through the round window, I could see it was a dress, my dress, the one I was currently wearing. The overhead light swayed gently, though there wasn't any breeze. I found the maintenance room by following the sound of static. Yellowed blueprints covered one wall, the hotel's original plans from 1924. A bank of security monitors cast a sickly glow over everything, but only one screen was active. It showed the ballroom, but something was wrong. The timestamp read 10:47 p.m., exactly 12 hours from now. The boiler room was worse. Steam hissed from ancient pipes, and every gauge I could see was buried in the red. Water pooled on the concrete floor, too warm when it soaked through my shoes. A chain hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly. Attached to it was a key card, the master key for the entire hotel, according to its label. Below it lay a maintenance log, the last entry dated June 8, 1924. I tried calling for help from an ancient phone booth tucked into an alcove. The phone was already off its hook, dangling by its cord. When I put it to my ear, instead of a dial tone, I heard music, our prom music, but distorted, playing at half speed like a record winding down, and underneath it, something else, screaming. The trail of wet footprints led up the grand staircase, past the ballroom level, higher and higher. A piece of familiar fabric was caught on the railing, the same shade as Madison's dress, but when I touched it, it crumbled like it had been there for decades. The higher I climbed, the more the hotel seemed to shed its modern renovations, revealing its true self beneath. The roof garden must have been beautiful once. Now it was a graveyard of dead plants and broken greenhouse glass. The rain had formed massive puddles, reflecting the city lights below like portals to another world. A clipboard hung by the door, its pages yellow with age. The last entry was a guest list for a prom from 1924, and there, halfway down the list, was my name, and Madison's. When I finally made it back to the ballroom, everything had changed. The tables formed a maze-like pattern that hadn't been there before. A massive chandelier lay shattered on the dance floor. But what scared me most was the spotlight. Just one, tracking across the empty room like it was following something or someone. I've spent weeks researching what happened that night. The hotel fire of 1924 was well documented. Started in the boiler room during a high school prom, they said. Dozens of students trapped in the maze-like upper floors. They never found all the bodies. The hotel was rebuilt, modernized, its dark history plastered over like the old wallpaper. They found Madison 3 days later in a sealed-off section of the 13th floor. She was dehydrated but alive, with no memory of what happened. The official story blamed teenage drinking, faulty elevators, and an overtaxed electrical system. The hotel issued a formal apology, offered compensation, and quickly returned to business as usual. But here's what keeps me up at night. In the hotel lobby, there's a shadow box on the wall. Inside is a single high-heel shoe, preserved behind glass. The placard says it was recovered after the 1924 fire. It's identical to the one Madison lost that night. And sometimes late at night, if you take the service elevator to the 13th floor, you can still hear the music playing. Our music, their music, the last dance that never ends. The Oakwood Country Club sat at the end of a winding private road, surrounded by old-growth forest that had been there longer than the town itself. As I pulled up to the guard booth in my mom's borrowed Mercedes, I could see fresh tire marks scarring the immaculate pavement. Someone had left in a hurry. The guard was missing, his little booth empty except for an abandoned coffee cup, still steaming. The after-party was Connor Mitchell's idea. His parents were club members, out of town for some charity event in Europe. Just a small gathering, he'd said at prom. But as I stepped into the club's grand foyer, something felt wrong. The ice sculpture, a swan that had greeted us an hour ago, was shattered, its broken pieces melting into the imported marble floor. The security cameras that usually blinked red were dark. Music echoed from somewhere deep in the building, but the usual party sounds, laughter, shouting, glasses clinking, were absent. I followed the bass line through the indoor tennis courts. The nets had been torn down, rackets and balls scattered like evidence of a struggle. In the viewing gallery above, a shadow moved, then another, and another. The women's locker room door was propped open with a Gucci handbag. Emma's, I recognized it from prom. Steam poured out like something from a horror movie. The mirrors all shattered. The showers were running full blast, hot water hammering against Italian tile. On a bench lay a phone, its screen still lit up with a half-typed 911 call. The Olympic-sized pool was next, its usually crystal-clear water now dark and churning despite the filtration system being off. Champagne bottles, some broken, some full, littered the deck. A single red heel floated in the deep end, drifting in lazy circles. The chemical smell was overwhelming, but it wasn't chlorine. It was something sharper, more industrial. I found signs of life in the kitchen, or at least recent life. Knives stuck point down in cutting boards, raw steaks left out to spoil. The walk-in freezer door hung open, mist rolling out across the floor. Inside, someone had written "Don't" in frost on the metal shelving. The rest of the message had already melted away. Through the kitchen's service door, I could see out onto the golf course. The immaculate greens were torn up, like someone had done donuts in a golf cart, which, it turned out, they had. An overturned cart lay half submerged in a water hazard, its lights still on beneath the surface. The decorative string lights in the trees had been yanked down, creating strange, twisted shadows in the fog that had settled over everything. The wine cellar door shouldn't have been unlocked. Neither should the case of vintage Bordeaux have been smashed open. thousands of dollars of wine forming dark pools on the stone floor. Labels had been torn from the walls, leaving behind rectangular patches of cleaner stone. A wine opener lay abandoned on a tasting table, its corkscrew stained with something darker than wine. The boardroom told a different story. Surveillance monitors lined one wall, all showing static except one, a live feed from the underground parking garage, where about 20 prom couples had gathered around someone or something I couldn't quite make out. The leather chairs were overturned, expensive cigars still burning in crystal ashtrays. On the mahogany table, someone had laid out photos, crime scene photos. I took the service elevator down to the parking garage. The luxury cars, Porsches, Benzes, BMWs, had all been vandalized, windows smashed, mirrors torn off. Oil leaked from punctured tanks, forming strange patterns on the concrete. The air smelled like gasoline and something metallic, and fear. The elevator doors closed behind me with a final sounding thud. The security office was a treasure trove of information, if you knew what you were looking at. Multiple screens showed the same feed from different angles. A police radio crackled with static. A logbook lay open, its last entry unfinished. Subject appears to be carrying. The coffee spilled across the keyboard was still warm. In the trophy room, history was being erased. Display cases smashed, plaques torn down, golf clubs bent and broken. A spotlight swung from a damaged mount, creating a strobing effect across the destruction. And there, carved into the solid oak wall, was a message: check the groundskeeper's shed. Below it, someone had added, too late. The shed looked normal at first, tools on hooks, fertilizer bags stacked neatly, the usual machinery. But then I saw the soil samples, dozens of them, carefully labeled and dated. UV lights hung over strange plants I didn't recognize. A laptop showed molecular diagrams, chemical compounds. Our groundskeeper wasn't just maintaining the golf course, he was experimenting on it. I've spent the last month piecing it together. The strange plant samples, the modified fertilizer, the way the grass on the golf course grew just a little too perfect, a little too green. Our groundskeeper, Dr. James Morrison, not just a groundskeeper at all, but a botanist whose research into aggressive plant growth hormones had been shut down by 3 universities. The official story blamed contaminated punch, bad drugs, mass hysteria. They couldn't explain why 37 prom goers were hospitalized with symptoms that baffled toxicologists, or why the grass on the golf course died in a perfect spiral pattern, or why Dr. Morrison's body was found in a water hazard, clutching a vial of clear liquid and smiling. But here's what terrifies me. The experiments didn't die with him. The plants in my mother's garden are growing too fast, too tall, too green, the neighbors' yards too, spreading outward from the country club like a viral infection. Sometimes at night, I swear I can hear them growing. And in my dreams, I'm back in that underground parking garage, watching as vines burst through the concrete, reaching for us with hungry tendrils. The perfect night, they said. The perfect venue. The perfect crime.